Chapter 1. Hills, fruitful trees, cedars, praise the Lord. Psalm 148. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray thee, Lord, my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray thee, Lord, my soul to take. Amen. The family of Alan Adolph Schierbaum. Chorused the final word. Amen. Alan was the initiator of the bedtime prayer, expecting his children to follow him in saying the words aloud, all together after they'd gone to bed. With the last chores of household work to do, Katie was the last one to go to bed. But while going about the house and finishing her day's work, she seemed to always want to hear her family say the bedtime prayer. This night of December 20th, 1935, was actually quite mild. Their home on the hill, in the Foxtan Webb house, seemed to be warm and friendly. It was almost like their first home, the Gene Kuntz house. That little family had lived 6 years on that Gene Kuntz place. 3 months earlier, on the 14th of September, the family had left that home and land in the south end of Christmas tree country. But in this familiar setting, to a lot of folks, it was unfamiliar to them. The family of 5 was trying to adjust to living in a bigger house and seeing their few pieces of furniture in new places, and wanting to think of this place as home. On February the 18th, 1928, the married life of Alan Adolphus Adolph and Katie Catherine Brooks Schierbaum began. There, while living on the Gene Kuntz place, they witnessed the births of 3 babies. May 5th, 1929, Kenneth Ray. April 16th, 1931, Benjamin Franklin, nicknamed Benny. September 14th, 1933, Elsie Geraldine, nicknamed Dean, also called Jewel Dean by her granny, Lulie Aran Webb Schierbaum. The heating stove, with its stovepipes connected to the flue, was paying off by keeping the spacious front room tobble warm. The tea kettle on the top of the stove was full of water and steaming. Its vapor mist floated upward and filled the room with moisture. The coal oil lamp's light made the room cheerful, and actually lit up the room quite well. Furnishings for the room were simple: a few pieces of furniture, mostly homemade, and 2 bedsteads, but enough to meet the needs of Alan's family. In comparison with Alan's maternal grandparents, who previously lived in this home, the furnishings would have been inadequate. His grandparents were Alan McDaniel, Foxtan Webb, and Martha Caroline Grace Webb. In an earlier time, this house, almost due north of the Webb Cemetery, had been the home of the 12 Webb children. The size of Foxtan's family necessitated the use of both the first floor and the airy, inhospitable upstairs space. For Alan's family, though, the first floor was more than big enough for him and his 4, giving them a kitchen and a large front room. Foxtan was born January 8, 1851, and passed away June 14, 1922. Martha Caroline was born March 9, 1856, and passed away February 3, 1927. With the Webb children being grown, and with the deaths of Foxtan and Martha Caroline, the house on the Foxtan Webb place was unoccupied and welcomed Alan's family. With a dream and a vision, Alan was thankful for the roof over the heads of his wife and 3 children, and for having a way to accomplish an honest day's work. He was willing to accept what he had in the way of comforts. The Bible spoke these words to him, "Be ye content with what you have," and Allen believed in the admonitions of the Holy Book. The aroma of the burning oily wick of the lamp blended with the smell of coal oil and turpentine, a familiar odor during the winter months. The folks all throughout the Christmas Tree Country hills swore by the strong-smelling remedy's effectiveness in easing the discomforts of a cold or a cough or a sore throat. And one important part of the cure was the willingness of the hands that prepared the medicine. Sometimes in the middle of the night, Katie'd be called upon to heat the mixture on a stove in which there was no fire. Without complaining, a fire'd be built in that stove, while a sick child, or Allen, or Katie herself, waited and expected to feel better when that chest rub was applied. The love and the willing hands helped the cold medicine to do its work. On this December night, 27-month-old Geraldine had a cough, sore throat. Katie had nothing better to doctor with than lard, turpentine, coal oil, and sugar, all mixed up together and warmed. Katie, having been raised on the cold medicine, was like the other folks of Christmas Tree Country who relied upon this remedy. For years and years, people of all ages used this medicine, those who had stuffy heads and those who had clear heads. Some folks claimed this remedy had saved their lives and helped them get rid of a bad chest cold in no time. Further medical help came in the form of advice given in a firm voice. "Now you stay in, and you don't be fanning around too much, and you don't go outside with a wet head." Before going to bed, Allen, knowing Katie needed his help, sat down near the heating stove in the front room and held Geraldine to keep her from fretting and hanging on to Katie's dress tail. "When a person's sick," he said, "he always gets worse at night time. But Katie, hon, I think she'll be better tomorrow. It sounds a little looser to me." He pulled Geraldine's long flannelette gown down over her legs and feet, held her close to his body for warmth, and cradled her gently. Within a short while, Geraldine was trying to go to sleep. Kenneth Ray and Benny were already sound asleep, and Allen knew Geraldine would be asleep as soon as her little head hit the pillow. He, too, was ready for bed. Yes, Allen was hopeful for a good night's rest for the whole family. In the meantime, Katie, working with the exactness of a person trained in the study of medicine, prepared the chest rub. She was careful, using only small amounts of turpentine and coal oil, because too much of those medicine parts would blister Geraldine's tender skin. The small pan of the chest rub was placed on top of the heating stove to melt the lard and warm the other ingredients. While the rub would still be good and warm, it'd be spooned onto a soft sock. Then a fair-sized part of the flannel cloth would be saturated with the warm medicine. Katie then would rewarm the sock by holding it over the heating stove. She'd use great care to heat it to the right temperature, not blistering hot, but just plenty warm. With a small safety pin, Katie'd pin the sock around Geraldine's neck, not too tight though, and Katie'd make sure the medicine touched Geraldine's sore throat. Then the flannel cloth would be rewarmed with the same amount of care. Then she'd wrap the warm flannel cloth around Geraldine's back and chest, with the medicine-soaked flannel being placed on Geraldine's chest. And then she'd pin together the ends of the flannel with a big safety pin, or maybe 2 big safety pins. As expected, Geraldine's coughing began again. Gently, Katy worked to soothe her little one. Deftly, with Geraldine lying on the bed, Katy wrapped the soft, heated, medicine-soaked sock and cloth around the small neck, back, chest, and pinned them in just the right way for comfort. "Let's rock a while, hon, and maybe this old coughing will stop. You just get up here really close to Mommy," she said soothingly, lowering her voice to the softest of baby talk tones, speaking in a manner common of a mother to a baby. "We'll just get that old coffin to stop hurting this baby girl. We need to rock a little bit and get all warmed up here." A memory brought a smile to Katy's face, the memory of their first home, and that first small rocking chair, now in disrepair with its broken rocker. First, Kenneth Ray was rocked, then Benny was rocked, and then Geraldine was rocked. Yes, Katy was thankful for that rocker. She knew Alan scraped together the money to buy it, just for her. He'd picked out that rocker in the early part of 1929, thrilled to death because Katy was in the family way. He'd told her a straight-back chair wouldn't be comfortable for her when she was rocking the baby. He also allowed that a chair's legs couldn't stand up to too much rocking. Katy remembered the rocking chair had decorations on its back panels, and Katy missed the comfortable rocking chair. And until Geraldine cut her stomach and eye teeth, Katy'd sit in the rocker and nurse her. Gradually, Katy weaned her and spent less time rocking. This night, with Geraldine on her shoulder, Katy sat down in a straight-back chair and covered Geraldine with a heavy quilt. The chill of the room prompted Katy to move herself, Geraldine, and the chair closer to the heating stove, as close as possible. For Katy, Geraldine's wheezing sounds were worrisome. "Mommy knows you don't feel good, hon, but I don't think you have any fever. Your breath doesn't smell too good to me. Lord, I ask you to help her, dear Lord. Please, Lord, and thank you, Lord." Instinctively, Geraldine snuggled closer to the warm bosom and shoulder of her mother. Two small arms, sleeved by the pink, homemade flannelette gown made by Katy, found their way around Mommy's neck. A tender kiss placed upon Geraldine's cheek and the gentle patting on her back were accompanied by the loving words, "My sweet baby girl, bumpity-bump, 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 bumpity," and the rocking chair rested on its four legs. Katy dozed for a while. Finally she woke up. She was no longer rocking. The straight-back chair was no longer moving. She thought, "How long have I been sitting here?" No longer did she hear the sounds of hard breathing, and the coughing had stopped. The slats of the chair pressed against her back. Her shoulder blades hurt. Her body was stiff. Her feet and legs ached. Katy was only 25 years old, too young for the varicose veins in her legs. She thought, "The reason my legs hurt so is because Geraldine's been fretful all day long." But Katy didn't complain. The chill of the room caused her to shiver, but she was comforted in knowing that her baby was warm under the quilt, sleeping away and suffering satisfaction. In the quietness of the room, Katy spoke softly. "Oh, how I thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. And now I need to lay this child down and finish what I have to do before I go to bed." Alan had worked hard this day. He was ready to sleep, more than ready, and thinking about all he had to do early in the morning caused him to yawn and sigh loudly. He pulled the covers up close to his face to keep out the lamplight. He became quiet. This was his time to talk to the Lord. Silently, and in the best way he knew, Alan gave thanks to the Lord for helping all of them get through another day. He remembered all the family, the Sherboms, the Brookses, forgetting no one. His thoughts dwelled for a long time on his mother, Lulie, his father, Albert William, and his 5 living brothers and 2 sisters, John Henry, William Bill, Frank, Daniel, Mary Caroline, Minnie, Roscoe. His thoughts included his widowed paternal grandmother, as Lena Elmira Daniels Sherbom. Allen felt a deep concern for all the folks and their well-being. Yes, and without knowing, he turned to the Lord when he was troubled for them. The turning was frequent. His need for the Lord's help compelled him to put his life in God's hands. Allen knew he couldn't manage the Fox Dan Webb place on his own. Even though Allen was strong and healthy and only 31 years old, the cattle project taxed his energy. His work was never-ending, keeping the ice chopped on the pond, hauling barrels of water from the North Spring, chopping wood, throwing down hay, shelling corn, mending fences, tending to the cows as they calved, and the seeing after the team of mules, 2 brood mares, a few hogs, the milk cows, and Katie's laying hens consumed most of his time. Yes, Allen needed the Lord's strength for courage in facing each new day. One problem facing him: the short December days didn't allow enough daylight hours for one man to finish his labors. He at times was pushed to his limits, not knowing how he'd be able to handle all the work. But his motivation kept him from being a Johnson County and work ethics quitter. His dream was to provide a more financially secure life by selling and raising cattle, and his eyes were on the futures of those who lived on the Fox Dan Webb place. Katie, too, worked hard, like Allen, from early morning until bedtime. Most of her days were filled with strenuous tasks, and the past few days had been extremely tedious, more difficult than usual. The Christmas tree country folks used the word tedious to describe tedious times. Katie struggled to keep something on the table for her family to eat every day at mealtime, 3 times a day. Even more difficult were her efforts to keep the family in clean clothes and bedtime, an almost impossible task. A large amount of dirty clothes accumulated rapidly for this family of 5. On the coldest days, Katie washed clothes in the kitchen. On a sturdy table which Allen had made with 2x4s and planks, she'd set up her wash tub, equipped with a washboard and a tub. Yes, a tub for rinsing the clothes. All wash water was dipped from the North Spring, carried to the house in barrels, heated on the kitchen stove, and poured into the galvanized wash tubs. The clothes were separated for washing: rags for dishes, wash rags, hand towels, underclothes, bedclothes, other white clothes, and finally the dark pieces. There were times when some clothes were separated to be washed by hand, the nice things, or new things, or pieces that might fade too much. Washing the clothes was a back-breaking all-day job. A bar of lye soap and the hand-forced movement of a piece of wet clothing in an up-and-down motion against the ridges of the washboard produced a piece of clean laundry for her family. That dish rag, an apron, a wash rag, a hand towel, a dress, a gown, a pair of socks, an undershirt, a handkerchief, a pair of long underwear, bloomers, a flannelette shirt, a bed sheet, a quilt, a pair of overalls, a heavy coat. Each piece was wrung out by hand and rinsed in the tub of bluish-colored water, rinse water to which a few drops of Little Boy Bluing was added to help make the clothes a better color. For some of the clothes, Katy made starch with flour and water. Starching was only for Sunday best and special pieces, white dresses, cotton dresses, table scarves, and such. To make the starch, she'd fill her dishpan with water and set it on the kitchen stove. From the tea kettle, she'd pour cold water into a bowl, spoon in a few tablespoons of flour, and mix the water and flour. When the water and flour were thoroughly mixed, she'd slowly pour the smooth water-flour liquid into the water in the dishpan, stir, and heat. Katy's starch was ready to be used after cooling. The wet clothes would sometimes be dried outside when possible. Even on dry days when the temperature was below freezing, she'd hang most of her laundry on the heavy wire clotheslines. Naturally, the clothes would freeze dry and be stiff when carried into the house, but she was happy in just being able to get the clothes dried one more time. On a rainy day, the wet clothes were hung on lines inside the house, and on lines behind the stove, and on nails behind the stove, or anywhere possible to get the clothes dried one more time. Seldom did she have any time to iron on wash day. The chore of Washington generally consumed the whole day, soaking, scrubbing, rinsing, hanging, and Katy tended to many jobs besides the washing. Only occasionally did she have any help on wash day, and that meant that she alone carried and heated all the water, kept a fire going in the kitchen stove, stood over the washboard, and hung up all of the wet clothing. Needless to say, with the biggest portion of her day being spent with the washing and cooking of the meals, the flat irons for ironing, and the paraffin for cleaning the flat irons were not of utmost importance in Katy's mind. After the washing was finished, the wash water and the rinse water would be carried outside and dumped. The table, tubs, and the washboard would find their resting places. Katy, with the washing done and with her clothes drying, continued on with her day's work. Complaining was uncommon for Katy. She knew what was expected of a married woman with a husband and children. Katy followed the example set by her own devoted mother, Rosie May Choate Reynolds Brooks. She'd seen Mommy work for hours in the field, carry water up the hill to the house, cook, sew, wash dishes, can vegetables and fruit, quilt, and take care of her large family. With that example before her, Katy believed that she, too, could be a good mother and a good wife, just like Mommy, and like the woman in Proverbs in the Bible. An industrious housewife like Katy, with so much to do, didn't waste hours away from the Foxden Webb place. She seldom found the extra time to leave her home and visit, but she was always welcoming those who did find the time to visit. Her last company came somewhat unexpectedly, and that visit was for the purpose of making plans for a hog killing. On that day, Alan's younger brother, John Henry Shearbaum, made a special trip up to the Foxden Webb place, bringing his wife, Dellie McHugh Shearbaum, their children, and a load of necessary items to kill hogs. The day of December 6, 1935, had hardly begun. Up the dirt road, coming from the west, was a wagon pulled by 2 horses, making its way to the Foxden Webb place. Alan put down his chopping axe, stopped splitting firewood, and looked long enough to figure out that John and his wife were riding on the wagon seat. He could hear the voices of John's children, and without hesitating, he walked across the yard to the back door, opened it, and called out, "Katy, Katy, John's coming." Alan and John had much in common. They were close in age, with Alan being 2 years and 2 days older than John. They had wives and children to support. Each felt a desire to help carry the burden for the other folks in the Schurbaum family. Furthermore, they genuinely enjoyed being together. Katie liked spending time with Deli, too. Katie'd say, "Deli can laugh at anything, and she makes me laugh. She helps me with all these children when she gets to come over here, and that's good." From the kitchen, Katie could hear Alan and John speaking in familiar exchanges. "Well, howdy. Howdy have you been? Have you seen Mommy and Poppy lately? Is everybody okay?" By the time Katie dried her hands and smoothed down her dark hair, John, Deli, and their 4 children, Mildred, Jimmy, Phyllis, June, and Alice Ruth, were out of the wagon and making their way to the back door. Katie opened the door, still surprised to see company, and happily welcomed them. "For goodness sake, why hello, Deli. John, all of you, come on in here." "Well, howdy, Katie," John was saying, without stepping inside the house with Deli and the children. "And how have you been feeling, Katie?" "Well, I just figured we ought to try to get on over here and try to get those 2 hogs killed while this weather's pretty cold. What do you think, Alan?" "Well, yeah, it's a good time to get it done, John. This is the 6th. Tomorrow's the 7th. I need to saw up some more wood." "Yeah, and we've already got a good 3 or 4 maybe oak trees sawed down." "Yeah, the ones we dragged up out there by the barn." "Yeah, well, the 8th is on a Sunday, so we could do it on a Monday. That is, if we don't get some fallen weather. I can get that wood ready tomorrow." As Alan talked, he motioned toward the wagon. He and John walked side by side to John's wagon and began unloading the hog-killing paraphernalia. 2 large black kettles, 2 barrels, heavy dishpans, a sturdy table, a sausage grinder, a sausage stuffer, a large press, some long boards, 2 sawhorses, a box of knives, a whet rock, and a new 8-inch mill bastard file. Carefully Alan looked over the knives in the wooden box. 2 old hickory knives, a clean cutter, a Shapley, and a bluegrass, all well-known preferred butcher knives. He picked up his favorite one, an old hickory. He noticed the shininess of the blade. He carefully touched the sharp edge with his tough-skinned thumb. "Ooh-wee, why, you could shave yourself with this knife, John." John laughed. "Yeah, Alan, you could. Poppy sharpened all of them." "Yeah, Poppy got busy and had all these knives sharpened up when I went over home the other day. Mommy said she'd be able to spare her best knife for a few days, just till there's some passing. Poppy even had these paring knives all done. Yeah, Alan, sometime we ought to maybe try to pick up a couple more good butcher knives. Don't you think so, Alan?" John showed him 2 old hickory knives. "I think Mommy ordered these here from some catalog. They're good knives, Alan." As they made plans to set up in the right place for the hog killing, Katie and Deli were inside the house, and Katie was saying, "Deli, you can just put the children's overshoes there on top of the wood box, and you go ahead and hang up their coats right there close to the stove. And Deli, you could throw a stick or 2 of stove wood into that heating stove. I'm really glad it's not rainy today. I just hope it won't turn off and rain and be a loblolly around here when we get ready to kill these hogs. Deli, you make yourself at home, and I've got to look at this cook stove again. And Geraldine, hon, you come on over here away from that hot oven door." Calling out from the kitchen above the noise of Geraldine, who was sitting on the kitchen floor at Katie's feet, banging pot lids, and the hubbub of the other 5 children, Katie asked, And Deli, have you heard anything from Frank and Mary? You know, the baby was born on the 26th of November, and I hear they named him Frankie Jr. after Frank, I guess. He'd be just about 11 days old now. Yes, I'd really like to see my sister Mary. I hope the baby's healthy. Well, no, Katie, we've not seen them just real lately, not since we all went down there. When was that we went down there? Right before little Frankie Jr. was born. I just can't remember, but they say he's got the biggest brown eyes. And you know Alice May's got brown eyes too. I'd say they're all right. I guess John and Alan will want to take some fresh meat to them. Frank likes sausage. John does too, and I might try to go over there with John one day, if the weather's not too bad. Maybe you and the children can go too, Katie. Well, we'll just have to see. And Deli, you've not heard from Dan and Gertie, have you? Their little boy, Chester Lee, was born November 17th. He'd be about a year old now. Well, Gertie's got her hands full, I'd say. Dan's good to Gertie, and I'm glad. I'd like to see all of them, Deli. I hear Paul and Margie are both fine. That's just what somebody told Lonzo, and then Lonzo told us. Paul was working with the CCC. Katie paused, and then finally she said, Paul and Margie got married the 19th of January. I've not seen Paul much since they got married. Yeah, Paul and Margie'll soon be married a whole year. Yeah, Deli, I'd like to see Paul and Mary and James and Mommy and Poppy too. From the front room, Deli said, well, Katie, maybe we can go down to see Frank and Mary. Maybe we can go down to see Dan and Gertie too. Everybody says Chester Lee's a pretty baby. Yeah, I'd like to go down to see the folks, but I don't know when. This weather makes it hard on all of us. Well, we won't all just pile in on Mary right at mealtime. She's got her hands full. We'll talk to Alan and John about it. Would you want to go, Katie? The fire in the cook stove started to catch up after Katie added some more dry corn cobs. She thought, I'm glad I put these cobs behind this stove to dry out. She put the stove lid back in its place over the blazing kindling. She couldn't hear all that Deli was saying. She didn't know what to tell Deli. Katie was thinking, if I get to feeling better. Katie washed her hands and rinsed off the dried white beans. She rinsed the three-legged cast-iron pot, and Katie put the beans into the pot and covered them with water from the water bucket. She added 2 sticks of wood to the cook stove. With a stove lid handle, she lifted a front stove lid and set the bean pot down in the opening directly over the fire. Now, she thought, these beans'll get a fast start. Her pot of beans would be ready for dinner, the noon meal, if she could hurry them, and John's family could eat with them and get back to his house, and he could get there so he could get his cow's milk before the long December night fell. Deli called out to Katie again. Would you and Alan and the children want to go down to Frank's? Again, Katie gave no answer. She thought to herself, if I get to feeling better. Katie's mind was on living one day at a time, and this day was one of the most important ones to her. Making plans for the too distant future seemed impossible. Instead, she concentrated upon keeping her stove going and having a meal on the table for all of them. In her oven, she was baking sweet potatoes with the jackets on, and when she opened the oven door, there little Jimmy was, checking out the big pan of sweet potatoes. He liked sweet potatoes. He saw the steam coming from the bean pot. He smiled. Jimmy loved beans. Carefully, Katie lifted the pot's lid. With a long-handled spoon, she moved the half-cooked beans from the bottom of the cast-iron pot and mixed the beans in their different stages of rattling on the plate with those being ready to eat. Katy knew how to hurry a pot of beans and how to keep them from sticking in that pointed, round space in the bottom. Yes, she'd cooked a lot of beans in this old pot, and that spoon reached down to that pointed place nearly every day. "I just hope this pot will last forever," she said to herself, "because I don't know what I'd do if I'd ever get a hole in the bottom of it. But it's cast iron, and I don't suppose it'll ever get a hole in it. That is a good pot. Now I need to wash this piece of hog jowl." Jimmy watched her add the hog jowl. He watched as she placed a clean dishcloth around the pot's hot bale and lift the heavy pot from the round hole in the stove. She was checking the fire. When she set the pot over the hole, he noticed the red flame escaping around the pot's bottom. "That's a hot pot, Aunt Katy," he said loudly, "and that's a big hunk of hog meat." Quite happy he was in knowing that Aunt Katy'd have something ready for them to eat before they'd have to go home to do the milking. "Jimmy, now, son, maybe you'd better not stand so awfully close to the end of that stove." "Okay, Aunt Katy," he said mildly. He enjoyed being with his aunt because she enjoyed being with him. Her brown eyes sparkled as she studied his blonde hair and blue-gray eyes. "Jimmy favors his daddy," she thought, "and I think he's going to be tall like John, too. Aunt Katy, where's Kenneth Ray?" "Oh, well, he's in school today, Sud. He might not like it when he comes home and finds out all of you children got to be here when he wasn't." Dely walked in the kitchen. She'd been listening to Katy talking with Jimmy. The children soon followed her. Katy sat down to rest, with Geraldine on her lap. "Now, Dely, sit down right here in this chair. Well, Dely, have the children all been pretty well this winter so far?" "Well, Jimmy and Mildred both had sore throats. I think Mildred might have had the earache, too. She kept pulling on her little right ear. She was sicker than Jimmy. Phyllis, June, and Alice Ruth, no, they've not been sick, not yet." Katy said, "It's about time for me to give all of mine a good dose of castor oil." She was laughing to herself, thinking of how they'd stand in front of her, usually in the kitchen, close their eyes, hold their noses, swallow, make faces, shudder, and act like chickens with their necks wrung, and fall down on the floor. "They don't like taking that castor oil, and I don't either, Dely, but I think I'll give it to them in about a week, early on a Saturday morning after we get these hogs killed. Yes, Katy, one thing's for sure. Castor oil keeps them cleaned out. I guess it keeps them from getting sick. Some. Well, Mommy said that too, and that all of us took it. It kept me and Paul and Mary and James and old and pretty healthy, I guess. I guess it's an old medicine. Anyway, Mommy'd line us all up and we'd have to swallow it, and maybe take it with a little sugar bit, but that didn't help any, did it?" Dely laughed, thinking about the times when her mother'd add the sugar. "Yes, I kept Mildred home from school today. She wasn't sick, though. John just told me to get the children ready so we could come up here and see Alan about killing these 2 hogs. Mildred was more than happy to be out of school. Yeah, she likes to be up here at Aunt Katy's, and yeah." Mildred moved closer to Katy and said, "Aunt Katy, I thought you and Uncle Alan lived in that other house, but I like this house, I guess. It's big. And, Aunt Katy, can I see your catalog and cut out some paper dolls? I won't let Geraldine and Alice Ruth get hurt with the scissors." For the rest of the morning, Alan and John worked outside, trying to get the hog-killing stuff organized. The children played. The women visited, whispered, shared laughter, cooked, filled the water bucket, carried in wood, watched the children, and kept fires going in the kitchen and front room stoves. Although Katy always enjoyed being with Dely, this particular visit was not especially pleasant for Katy. She'd been sick on her stomach just before John and Dely rode up. Being sisters-in-law, she and Dely often exchanged confidences, and she felt comfortable in telling her things. Deli, I've just not been feeling well for a good bit now. I've had that sick feeling the past few days, and just for the past few days. And smoothing the front of her apron, she added, especially early in the morning when I'm trying to fry bacon. No comment came from Deli's lips. She glanced at Katy. Deli surmised that Katy was in the family way, and without saying a word, Deli held her hands down at her side, counted months on her finger, and figured, Katy's been sick some time already. Now this is not quite the middle of December, so along about the middle of July next year, 1936. However, Katy couldn't be sick. There wasn't any time for that. Regardless of the reason for being sick, Katy couldn't be sick. No. Alan and John had been planning to kill hogs when the weather had turned cold. Monday would be a cold enough day, more than likely. That meant work, work, work. Katy knew she and Deli had their jobs cut out for them. First and foremost would be the work of caring for the children, 7 in all. 5-year-old Jimmy, 3-year-old Phyllis June, 15-month-old Alice Ruth, 4-year-old Benjamin Franklin, 27-month-old Elsie Geraldine. The 2 who begged to stay home from school, 7-year-old Mildred and 6-year-old Kenneth Ray, promised to be good and stay out of the way, so that would make up a group of 7 young ones, wiping noses, tying shoelaces, getting water from the dipper, and 100 trips, fanning in and out the back door. Well, that would keep Katy and Deli fully occupied. And Deli, I just hope this backyard'll be frozen on Monday, and let's hope we won't have any snow. Katy was saying that after her umpteenth trip in and out of the kitchen. Anyway, that'd mean we wouldn't be knee-high in our overshoes and trying to wade around in snow and mud. But Katy wasn't worried as much about the snow and the mud as she was about how she was feeling. She shuddered when she thought about working with the fresh meat and the grease and the cleaning out of the entrails for the sausage. But she said resolutely, I can't be sick, not right now. But Deli, just thinking about meat makes me nearly throw up. Whew, I've had to work hard at it just to keep from getting sick, even when I'm frying a chicken. I ought not fuss, but to tell you the truth, I'm sick of chicken. Oosh! A compassionate glance between Deli and Katy communicated the tender feelings and understanding between the sisters-in-law. No words were exchanged, but Katy felt encouraged because she knew Deli cared for her. Deli, she thought, is a good woman. Katy took a deep breath, held her shoulders upright, and spoke to herself and to Deli. Yes, my appetite's been off lately, but I know how much we all need fresh meat in the smokehouse. This couple of hogs will tide us over until we can all get together, maybe up in late January. Deli, you know Alan always says when a person's got a job, he just ought to get busy and do it. And I know Alan's right. And I'm not complaining, Deli. I'm thankful to the Lord that Alan's stout and strong enough to work hard the way he does. And John works hard, too. And I'm so glad that you and John can help us out. Well, now, Katy, that's just fine. Katy added, I'll have to grit my teeth and endure it. The Lord'll help me get through all of this hog killing. I'll feel better Monday, maybe. Early in the morning of December 9th, Alan was in the barn, milking the cows and making plans for a busy day. He was thinking to himself, it's got to be down around 0, good weather for killing hogs. I'll get that ice chopped in that pond and feed the mules and these brood mares and slop these hogs and throw some corn out for the chickens. That big sow now is going to find pigs. I'll have to shut her up in that stall in a couple of weeks. I'm going to shut up the 2 hogs we're going to kill today and have that done when John gets here. Well, that's the milking done one more time. Didn't get much milk. The cows are falling off. Only part of a cream can. John'll be here after a while. Poor old John Deli. Mommy worries about him. John'll be 30 years old on Christmas Day, and Brother Robert's been gone a whole year, and then some. Dr. Thornton might have helped Robert, maybe, if he'd had any notion Robert was in a shape like that. Doc said Robert was going from boyhood to manhood. A hard time on a boy, a hard time, and poor little Philip. Well, Alan said out loud, trying to lay aside those thoughts. Following a routine, Alan let the cows out, carried the milk to the house, followed the outline he'd laid out in his mind. He looked up at the sky. Stars twinkled. The moon was slightly overhead, shining brightly as it followed its prescribed course to the west. The clock was striking for the 5th time as Alan entered the kitchen with an armful of wood. In the kitchen he found Katy dressed warmly, wearing buckle-up overshoes, separating the biscuit dough, and patting out her 15 biscuits in the rectangular biscuit pan. Bacon sizzled in the cast-iron skillet. With a spoon, Katy spread the hot grease over the moist, unbaked biscuit dough. The blue and white granite coffee pot steamed, promising Alan some hot coffee. Without saying a word, he laid the wood in the wood box, added wood to the heating stove, picked up the almost empty water bucket, and headed out the back door. He thought, Katy'll just about have that skillet full of Webb sop ready when I get everything all done outside, and I'm hungry. This is a cold morning, he said as he opened the kitchen door. I filled up a couple of extra buckets of water, Katy. That one big bucket's got a hole in it. It's not much good to us that way, but we'll use it anyway. I'll have to fix that hole when I can find some time. Here's this water. We'll use plenty today. We ought to try to keep both of these tea kettles full. Katy heard the heating stove door being opened and closed. She also overheard conversations in the front room. She smiled. She listened. She set the fried eggs to one side, stirred Webb's sop, pulled the pan of biscuits out of the oven, set the eating table for 5, poured 3 glasses of milk, set Alan's coffee cup and saucer in their right places, and set Geraldine's coffee cup in its place, and then she thanked the Lord. Kenneth Ray was telling Alan what was, for a change. No, Daddy, I don't go to school today, Kenneth Ray announced firmly. Mommy and you said so. We did, Alan said, pretending to be serious. Yes, Daddy, I'm going to stay home and help you and Uncle John kill hogs. Well, you boys ought to get some clothes on, and socks and shoes, and I need to put some more wood in this stove. Whew, it's cold, really cold outside. Daddy, Geraldine said, rubbing her eyes and jumping off the bed. Come on over here, hon. Let's not run around here in this gown tail. Katy, he said, turning his head toward the kitchen, this child needs to have some more clothes on her. It's cold morning. Soon Alan was sitting in the warmest place in the kitchen, to Katy's left at the end of the hot cook stove, and close enough to see the Webb sop bubbling in the big skillet. On his lap sat Geraldine, and he was telling the boys to get washed up for breakfast. Thoughts were racing through his mind. He knew that he and Katy were facing a hard, cold day there on the Foxden Webb place. Breakfast, like his early chores of the day, was hurried for Alan. As Katy poured his third cup of coffee, he said, "I'm going to swallow this and get on outside and get those hogs shut up in that front stall and get the rest of that wood ready. I'm thankful for that big pile of dry wood. It's cold, but it's not snowing. John'll be here pretty soon." Katy sat down in her chair again. Kenneth Ray asked for some more milk. Benny wanted blackberry jelly on his biscuit. Geraldine wanted more coffee. Alden wanted to get started, and Katy didn't know which one to take care of first. Lord, she thought, just help me and us, all of us, to get through this day. The minutes of Katy's morning sped by. Soon Deli and the children entered the back door. Only a few moments passed before the Sherboms got down to the serious business of the day. John, Deli, in the kitchen before they knew what was happening. Deli joined Katy in the kitchen, washing the breakfast dishes. John worked outside with Allen, building fires under the kettles. Mildred was Miss Eileen, the teacher, and organized her school of 6 pupils. Miss Eileen's web school was ready to take up in the front room. Coming into the kitchen, Mildred asked, "Aunt Katy, would you let us move the eating bench into the front room? We need a recitation bench." And shortly, 6 straight back chairs and 1 broken chair with no back were lined up in a row, one after another in the front room, a safe distance away from the Wilson heating stove. Sitting in 2 of those chairs were Geraldine and Alice Ruth, the youngest pupils. On the recitation bench were, from left to right, Kenneth Ray, Jimmy, Phyllis, and Benny. Standing in front of them, behind the library table, was their teacher, Miss Eileen. Katy went into the front room to put wood into the heating stove. She was amused with the reenactment of a day at the Webb School. There Mildred and Jimmy were, playing school, after begging to stay at home on a school day. She enjoyed seeing these 7 Sherbom cousins being together and having fun. She thought, these children, they're using that eating bench and those chairs, and they're using that library table that Poppy built to play school. As always, Katy didn't have time to just stand around. She had too many jobs waiting for her, but school took up in the little front room school in the Fox Dan Webb house. Mildred, looking at them from behind the library table, said, "Now you call me Miss Eileen. Don't you call me Mildred. You call me Miss Eileen. Kenneth Ray, you stand up. Count to 10. Kenneth Ray, standing up, counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's right. Now you sit down. Jimmy, you stand up. Jimmy, Jimmy, you count 5. Jimmy, standing nervously, counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's right. Now, Phyllis, you stand up. Jimmy spoke up, protesting. Mildred, Miss Eileen, you forgot to tell me to sit down. Somewhat flustered, Mildred said, "Well, Jimmy, you sit down, and Phyllis, you stand up." Still somewhat flustered, Mildred said, "Phyllis, you show me how old you are." Phyllis, holding up 4 fingers on her left hand, while holding her pointing finger and thumb down with her right hand, stared directly into Miss Eileen's eyes, and not batting an eye. She just took a breath. Mildred said, you sit down. And, Benny, you stand up." Looking at Benny and thinking, "Benny, show me how old you are." Holding up 4 fingers on his right hand, Benny said confidently, "I can even count to 4. Do you want me to count all the way up to 4? Well, she shifted her weight from right to left. "Benny, you go ahead and count up to 4. Benny, counting and looking at his fingers on his right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this one, holding out his thumb. He said, "Is 5. Well, that's right. You sit down. Now all of you," pointing to the 4 on the recitation bench, "take your seats." And she waited for them to sit down in the straight-back chairs. "Geraldine and Alice Ruth, you come up here and recite." The girls sat down on the far end of the recitation bench, as close to each other as possible, and looked as if they were being examined by Dr. Veitch or Dr. Thornton or Dr. Walker. "Alice Ruth, you stand up. Now, Alice Ruth, tell me how old you are." Alice Ruth, holding up the pointing finger on her right hand, said nothing. Waiting to hear Alice Ruth say 1, Alice Ruth, you don't have to say it. You can sit down now. Geraldine, you stand up. You say your ABCs." Standing up slowly, Geraldine said, ABC. Well, that's right. Now you sit down." And after the 7 pupils were seated, "Now here is the blackboard." Pointing to the space above the footboard of Kenneth Ray and Benny's bed, Mildred said, "Now all of you come up here. Now, all of you write on this blackboard with this," and she pretended to place something in the palms of their hands, "with this chalk." Katy, because the heating stove needed wood, entered the front room at the right moment, just in time to see them frantically writing on the imaginary blackboard with imaginary chalk and erasing imaginary marks. All 6 were lined up side by side at the foot of the bed. Geraldine and Alice Ruth were at the far, far end of the footboard, with no more room on the chalkboard. Being the smallest, they were pushing and trying to find a place so they could make chalk marks. The older ones, with their arms flying in the air, paid no attention to Geraldine and Alice Ruth. Instead, they marked and erased and spent their time trying to win Miss Eileen's approval. Before Miss Eileen had time to say, "School's dismissed," she was interrupted by Katy's magic words. "Dinner's ready. You children come on in here and eat before your daddies come in. Bring those 4 chairs in here with you. I think you can just leave that eating bench in there where it is." 14 hands were lathered up with yellow soap and washed in the lukewarm water in the washpan. The children ate, enjoying Katy's fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, biscuits, Deli's apple cobbler, and their day without a care in the world. School took up again. The men came inside, washed up, and were happy to see the large bowls of hot food in front of them. They were thankful in knowing part of the hog killing was over. The women sat down at the table with them when they could. Mostly, though, they were on their feet and serving the men with strong, steaming coffee, glasses of milk and water, and heaping bowls and platters with hot food. The men ate in a hurry. The dinner time came to an end quickly. The 4 adults resumed their duties, inside and outside, and the business of the day continued on in the Fox Dan Webb place. In the front room, Miss Eileen's pupils were probably having recess. The singing of "Ring Around the Rosie," "Pocket Full of Posies," and the sounds of feet and thumps on the floor were loud. At the same time, protests were forceful. "I don't want to play that girl game. I don't either. Me neither." And the singing stopped. In Katy's kitchen, the cooks weren't singing, playing, or protesting. Their music was that of banging pans, washing dishes, carrying water, filling tea kettles, and keeping the fires going. Their amusement was that of listening and hearing jumping, shouting, and ouch yells. No, their protesting wouldn't have amounted to anything of value, so they hurried from chore to chore and worked relentlessly. Deli did take the time to glance into the front room. She whispered, "Katy, you need to see this. Come in here a minute if you can." There on the front room floor, 6 frogs were lined up in a straight row, squatting down with their heads against the floor. The leapfrog was Jimmy, and he was yelling, "I'm the leapfrog because I have the longest legs." The frogs made up their own rules for the game. One rule was that the big frogs couldn't fall on or smash the little frogs on purpose. Another part of the rules involved a frog wrestling match with Kenneth Ray, Jimmy, and Benny, all three at the same time. The 4 girl frogs sat and watched the performance. Then Katie and Deli saw the possibility of broken arms and bruises, and at that point they decided to protest gently. "You be careful, boys. Don't play so rough." "Calf rope! Calf rope!" Benny yelled while being held face down on the floor by Jimmy and Kenneth Ray. Overalls, flannel shirts, and legs were flying in every direction, and Benny yelled out in a choked voice, "Calf rope! Calf rope! Ouch! Hey, stop it! Calf rope!" "Now, you children," Katie said quite firmly, "it's not a good idea to do that here in the house. Why don't you all just sit down and rest a minute?" The red-faced, panting boys gave her looks of disapproval, but she said, "Now you mind me. Get a drink of water and play something else. I think Alice, Ruth, and Geraldine need to rest for a little while. Don't you, children?" "Uh-huh, Aunt Katie," Alice Ruth answered, "but I do want a drink of water." There were sounds of hard breathing, but finally tempers calmed down. "Well, I've got to go to the outhouse," one of the boys said. Into the kitchen and out the back door the boys went with the girls on their heels. The quietness in the front room seemed strangely odd. The dust didn't even have time to settle, because shortly the back door opened and the 7 came inside, shaking and yelling, "It's cold, boosh!" And they took their turns in going through the motions of washing and drying their hands. All 7 lined up at the water bucket for drinks from the dipper. Gradually, one by one, they wandered into the front room, apparently in need of something else to do to keep them busy. Alice, Ruth, and Geraldine sat on the flowered cretonne-covered couch, which Katie sometimes let out to make a bed. The girls were ready to drop off to sleep, when Geraldine, realizing she was going to miss all of the fun, asked if anybody wanted to look at all of the pictures. Although the boys seemed less than enthusiastic about such a sissyous way to play, they consented by not objecting, and Geraldine was the one picked to go into the kitchen and ask the big question. "Mommy," she said, "can we look at the pictures in that big box under the bed?" "Under the bed?" Mildred asked. "Uh-huh," Geraldine said. "Geraldine, I'm not going to get in a box under the bed to look at pictures. I'm too big. Aunt Katie, all of us don't have to get under the bed, do we?" "No, hon, you don't. You children," Katie said, thinking of what Geraldine had said. "Can we look at the pictures in that big box under the bed?" Katie quickly glanced at Deli, who was laughing and shaking her head. "That is pretty funny, Katie. These children can come up with some cute things if you just have the time to listen to them." Katie dried her hand and knelt down to pull a cardboard box from under her bed. She opened the box. There on top lay a rectangular-shaped special treasure inside an old pillow slip. Katie always kept that something special in the pillow slip. "I'll put this somewhere else for now," she said. Covering the box was a piece of cloth. "Children, I just keep this heavy cloth over the pictures to keep them from getting too dusty. Well, you can see the pictures, children, but just be careful with them. Just try to keep them from falling down on the floor and not getting stepped on. Try to keep them from getting dirty or lost. You can just put them out on this library table and stand right here and look at them." Hurrying, she returned to Deli and the dishwashing. Katy had no time to dawdle, because soon, too soon, the men'd have that sausage meat ready to be stuffed and seasoned, and all of a sudden Katy felt sick. "I think I'll sit down for a minute," she thought, "when I can find the time." "What's the matter, Katy?" Dely asked. "I was just thinking you looked a little peaked, and now you really do look peaked." "Well, Dely, I guess it was all of that bending over, and all of a sudden I'm a bit sick on my stomach. You're even a little green under your eyes, Katy. Now you come on over here and dry your hands and go into the front room and get off your feet for a while. I'll finish washing up those greasy utensils." Dely never left her side, even while Katy was at the washpan. She led her to the front room. "You sit down right here, Katy, right here by this heating stove. I don't want to see you faint or anything." "Phew," Katy said, welcoming the straight-back chair. She closed her eyes, trying to squelch the feeling in her stomach. But immediately the children gathered around her with questions about the people in the pictures. She felt as if she wanted to throw up, but there the children were, needing her attention, and Mildred was wanting an answer. And Mildred was persistent. She held up a picture of Benny and said, "Aunt Katy, would you tell us the story of Benny and the pitchfork?" Katy swallowed hard. Slowly, very slowly, the story began. "Well, you see, Benny was about 2 years old." Ooh, Katy stopped, hoping she'd be able to continue with the story. "It was milking time. I went to get up the cows. Well, I was barefoot, and I had to go through briars and rocks." Katy tried to enjoy talking to the children, and they were enjoying hearing her talking. "Well, I finally did get my shoes on, and I got the milk buckets and the cream cans ready, and Alan had put the cows' heads in the stanchions. Some of them wanted to kick sometimes, so your Uncle Alan," she said, looking at Mildred, "well, he always takes care of that. You see, we had to work together. And I don't know where Kenneth Ray was when all of this was happening, children." She stopped and thought, I guess Kenneth Ray must have been in the box. Helping her tell her story, Jimmy asked, "Aunt Katy, where was Geraldine when all of it happened?" "Well, you see, children, Geraldine was, Geraldine? Mildred asked, "Where was Geraldine, Aunt Katy?" All eyes were on Katy, listening intently, while Mildred gave her explanation. "Aunt Katy, she might have been somewhere in the box." "Well, now, children," Katy faltered. She went on to think to herself, "I was in the family way with Geraldine. But these children, they don't need to know all about that." "Now," Katy said, "let me tell you this about Benny." "All right. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. Well, Benny was just a little fella, and we were down at the barn trying to get that job of milking done." She paused. "Well, Alan was carrying Benny, and I guess I must have been carrying the milk buckets. And I told you that cows kick sometimes, didn't I? Cows can kick hard. Well, now I got a little bit ahead of myself. You see, Kenneth Ray was born before Benny. We had to keep Kenneth Ray out of the way when we both milked. Alan had built this good warm box for Kenneth Ray to play in down there on the Gene Coons place, and then when Benny came along, we put both of them in the box. It was a good box for the boys," she said. "Well, Alan was carrying Benny that day. Right then, right at that time, and for some reason a cow just up and kicked a pitchfork. Well, and it flew up, and one of the prongs stuck Benny in the head." She stopped with the telling of the story. She took a breath. "Well, Alan pulled that pitchfork out of Benny's head, and he said he had to pull hard to get it out. But one of the prongs was missing on that pitchfork. If that prong would have been on that pitchfork, it would have gone right into Benny's eye. That's all that saved his little eye. Yes, that's all that saved his eye. Then Alan went on to go down to see Olin and Jenny to tell them. Olin's my brother, and Jenny's his wife. Well, Olin and Jenny right then came on over to our house there on the Gene Kuntz place, and I was out on the east end of the front porch washing off Benny's head when they got there. Olin said he thought right at the first, from the way Alan was acting, that Benny might have toppled down into the cistern. Olin said Alan was scared to death and was going after Dr. Thornton. Well, Olin asked me to show him the pitchfork. He looked at the pitchfork, and then he looked at Benny. I remember I asked him, "Do you think he's hurt, Olin?" And Olin didn't really know, I guess. And then when Alan came back, Dr. Thornton was with him, and the first thing he wanted to see was that pitchfork. Dr. Thornton said he thought it hit the bone mostly. Anyway, Katie said, taking a breath and exhaling, the doctor left some medicine, and Benny got well. The Lord was just with us, children. Yes, the Lord was with us. Katie's sick feeling had passed. The questioning stopped, temporarily. After checking the heating stove, Katie returned to the kitchen, washed her hands, dried the dishes, washed 4 big dishpans, and washed the bucket with the hole in it. She thought to herself, "We'll probably need this bucket, too." "Do you feel some better, Katie?" Deli asked. "You sit down as long as you need to." "Mommy, will you look, Mommy?" Kenneth Ray asked, holding up a picture for her to see. "Is this a picture of me?" Katie nodded and told him. "You were about a year old in that picture, son. Noel Edmonds came by and took that picture of you, sitting on the floor on that quilt. Now, I don't know just who put that quilt down there. I don't even remember whose quilt it was." She took a deep breath and sighed. "I remember I made those little rompers you had on." Rompers. "And I embroidered the little rabbits on the front. You were just grinning from ear to ear. Oh, me." Kenneth Ray, hold it up a little higher so I can see it better. "Yes, that's a picture of you, son. You were a pretty baby." After Kenneth Ray left the kitchen, Deli was looking still at Katie to see how she was feeling, and Katie softly said to her, "You know, Deli, one time when I was in the family way with Kenneth Ray, I walked 2.5 to 3 miles all the way over to Mommy and Poppy's. Deli, on the way back, I stopped on the top of that high hill. You know where that hill is. Just long enough to catch my breath and to look at the bag of clothes Mommy'd fixed up for the baby. I guess I thought I couldn't wait to get home to look at them." Katie paused. She was amused. Deli just chuckled. "I remember Mommy made one baby dress to open down the side. It was white with pink rick-rack." Katie laughed harder, remembering what happened. "Well, Deli, while I was standing there, holding up all of those baby clothes, there Pat Riley was, standing right there in front of me. But I didn't know Pat was seeing me. But he was. I tell you, I was embarrassed. He said, 'Howdy, Katie,' and there I was, just holding all those baby clothes up in the air right in his face." Deli laughed loudly and said, "Well, I'd say Pat was got too, but it is funny." During this time on the busy hog-killing day, the two were having a moment of relaxation along with the work. And another time, Deli, when I was in the family way with Benny, I was so homesick to see Mommy and Poppy. It was in the early part of spring. The weather was warm. Well, I told you it was 2.5, 3 miles to where they lived, didn't I? Well, I was so homesick, and I had to carry Kenneth Ray most of the way, and then the little fella would walk some too. I was just so homesick. Yes, I know all about that, Katie. Yes, I do. Katie reminisced. When Benny was born, and he was born at night, we had green onions big enough to eat. That was the middle of April. Delley, I had a hard time when Benny was born. Dr. Thornton was the doctor. He told Alan, "This makes me feel 10 years older." Well, Mommy and Dr. Thornton both stayed with me, and it was about midnight when Benny was born. That was on a Thursday when he was born, and then on Sunday I really got sick. I guess I had some kind of infection. Well, Mommy, she went home on Friday, but then she found out I wasn't doing very well. She walked all the way over to the Gene Kuntz place on Monday to see me. Tishy Harris was staying with us to cook and help out some. I had to stay in the bed for 9 days, you know. Well, when Mommy got there and took one look at me, she just started to cry. And she says, "Well, Katie, what's the matter now?" My poor old Mommy. So Alan, that day, went over to his folks' house there on the Carson place. Lulie and Albert, well, they had a telephone. Alan was going to get a hold of Dr. Thornton. But instead of the doctor coming to see me, Lulie came. I think she knew more than Dr. Thornton anyway. Mommy helped me to get Benny started with nursing. She made a sugar tit with sugar and water. You know, Mommy just took a clean piece of cloth and put some sugar in it. I'd say you had to do that too, Delley. Well, Mommy'd squeeze it and make it small and put it close to Benny's lips, and then my milk came down on the 3rd day. I stayed in bed the 9 days. 9 days. You know all about that, Delley. Well, anyway, I started to get a little better. Sometimes, at night, Kenneth Ray and the baby'd both be sleeping in the bed with me. I told Alan we'd just have to almost make Kenneth Ray sleep in the bed with him. I guess Kenneth Ray was tired, or something, maybe, because the little fellow would want to flounce around a lot, and I was afraid he'd roll over and might just smother Benny. Things like that worried me. It hurt me to have to move Kenneth Ray out of the bed. You know, Delley, we hadn't even thought of a name for Benny, she said, somewhat amused. And I was still trying to stay in bed for the 9 days. Well, one morning Alan came in from doing the milking and told me, "Katie, I know what we're going to call the baby. Benjamin Franklin." I'll tell you, I was just got when he said that. Katie chuckled again. But that's what we named him. That's what Alan wanted, and we just called him Benny after that. Well, and then Benny cried every night, from a little before sundown until 9 or 10 at night. Yeah, Katie, I guess he had the colic. Or maybe he might have been constipated, the little fella. I'd rock him and walk him and pat him, and he'd cry. And Alan would walk him and pat him. Oh, me. I know, Katie, I know. I've been through it, too. Well, Dr. Thornton, no, it was Dr. Walker from Vienna was there with us when Kenneth Ray was born. Kenneth Ray was born at midnight, but we'd call Dr. Thornton from Goreville when Benny was born, and we called him when Geraldine was born. But I got along all right with Geraldine. We had Dr. Thornton, but I got along all right. And after Geraldine was born, Alan's sister, Mary, came over and stayed with us and helped out. It's 1,000 wonders any of the children ever lived. Katie stopped talking. There was no smile on her face. Well, Delley, I'll go out and put some more water in these buckets and tea kettles and see if Alan and John need us. On her way to get the water, Katie thought. Benny and Geraldine had dark hair when they were born. Kenneth Ray's hair was blonde, like Alan's when he was little. I'm just thankful they're healthy. Lord, I've got a lot to be thankful for, and I don't want to forget to thank God for all of his blessings. Seeing Katie at the water barrel, Alan called out to her, "Hun, we're a good bit ahead of what I thought we'd be. We might be ready to do up this sausage pretty soon here now." We're going to need help with these cracklins here in a little bit, I'd say, and we'll need a couple of big dishpans too." "Well, we'll have things ready, Ellen." She thought, "Geraldine loves cracklings, and I'd better get these 2 buckets of water in the house and fill up the tea kettles and get some water heated up." She carried a full bucket on each side of her, contemplating the work ahead. She was also enjoying the memory. When Geraldine was 14 months old, she thought to herself, she liked to suck on the cracklins. At the back door, Kenneth Ray met her with questions about another picture he'd found. "Mommy, is this Grandpa Brooks?" "Well, let me wash my hands and I'll see." "Hold it up for me to look at it." "Yes, that's your Grandpa Brooks. When you were little, Poppy'd sit in his cane-bottomed chair and hold you on his lap and rub your bald head. Pop was bald too, like you, son, when you were really little." She smiled. Katy just always felt good when she was thinking about Poppy. "And, Mommy, is this blind Grandma's picture?" Katy stooped down to look at that picture. "Now hold it up so I can see it better." "Yes," she said, laughing as she spoke. My, that was funny. She looked at Kenneth Ray and laughed harder. Soon the other kids were in the kitchen with Kenneth Ray, Katy, and Deli, and Kenneth was a little confused about why Mommy was laughing, and Benny asked, "Aunt Deli, why is Mommy so tickled?" Deli said, "I don't know, son. It's got something to do with blind Grandma, I guess." "Oh, Benny, now I'm not making fun of blind Grandma." Katy looked at her 7 little ones and she said, "Now, blind Grandma is a good woman, and all you children need to know that. Blind Grandma's 7 great-grandchildren." She looked at them to see that they were listening. "Yes, blind Grandma is a good woman. I was just thinking about the time when Kenneth Ray was a baby and I was trying to get him to go off to sleep. I guess I must have been trying for a long time." Well, blind Grandma bent over, right down close to Kenneth Ray's face, and looked at him. She saw his eyes were closed, and she whispered, "The baby's almost asleep." Well, the funniest thing happened. Kenneth Ray pulled one of his eyelids open and said, "Me not asleep." Katy laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. She repeated Kenneth Ray's words, "Me not asleep." Deli and the children laughed with her, because they were happy in being together and having fun. And then Kenneth Ray wanted to hear the Levi cowbell story. "Oh, that one. Well, you know Levi Edmonds, don't you, Deli? Well, Levi always wore a belt around his overalls. Kenneth Ray, you were a little fellow then, and of course Levi was a lot taller, and you looked at Levi's belt and looked up at Levi and said, 'Levi, Levi, Daddy's got a cowbell, Levi.'" Merriment filled the kitchen on the Foxtan Webb place. Kenneth Ray stopped laughing and asked, "Mommy, why did Levi wear a belt over his overalls?" Her talkative son's question reminded Katy of another funny time. She started laughing again, and Kenneth Ray asked the same question again. "Now, I don't know the answer to that, Kenneth Ray. I guess you'll have to ask your daddy. I got a lot of work to do, but I'll tell you what's so funny. You always like to talk, son. It's not been too long ago when we were all down at your granny's house. You were talking and talking and talking, and your Granny Sherbaum turned around and said to you, 'Well, shut up. You're as bad as Aunt Nancy Casey.' And Kenneth Ray, you just looked up at your granny and asked, 'Well, who is Aunt Nancy Casey?' That just was so funny." Katy and Deli looked at each other and smiled. Simultaneously, they broke out into one loud guffaw. Katy attempted to repeat what Kenneth Ray asked Luley, who, but her laughter interfered with her words. She tried again. Who is, oh, me, oh, Katy had to pause and catch her breath. That was so funny. She just couldn't stop giggling, and the children joined in. All dishwashing and tea kettle filling and stove feeding stopped. The crescendos of voices exploded in that kitchen on the Foxden Webb place. In the uncontrolled moments of boisterous fun, the large room was full of exclamations, loud laughing, and children rolling on the floor and tears rolling down their cheeks. In truth, the children didn't actually know what was so funny to Katy and Delly. They only knew something was funny. They thought it had something to do with Granny telling Kenneth Ray to shut up. Well, that was partly true. What these grandchildren of Luly's and Delly's children didn't fully understand was that Katy and Delly were well acquainted with Aunt Nancy Casey, and they were well acquainted with Granny too, and they were Granny's daughters-in-law, and Katy was kin to Aunt Casey. Well, everybody was kin to everybody, and to clarify all of this, everybody knew Granny, and everybody knew Granny tell you what she had on her mind, and she'd say what she thought in the blink of an eye, and she didn't mince any words, and when she said something, the something she said was the last something to be said. That was Luly's nature. Everybody'd been on the receiving end of Luly's "I'll tell you what I think about this situation" straight talk, and she'd tell you all right, and if you liked it, it was fine with Luly. If you didn't like it, it was still fine with Luly. And after saying what she had to say, with her long skirts and her underslip flopping, she was on her way to tackling another hard job, or straightening out some other poor misguided soul. Granny. Luly. She'd done a whole lot of lining out. Yes. Well, Katy and Delly were reliving times when they'd been around Luly. They understood her and saw the best in her. Yes, Katy and Delly tried to stop all of their laughing, but when they'd make eye contact, it'd start all over again. Finally, when the liveliness did calm down, Katy's talkative son was still wanting an answer to the question that he'd asked his granny. Who is Aunt Nancy Casey? Mommy, who is Aunt Nancy Casey? Well, son, Aunt Nancy Casey is your great-grandpa Schultz's sister, and a good woman, Kenneth Ray, and your granny's a good woman, too. I guess Luly thought Aunt Nancy just liked to talk a lot. Well, and your granny would said that Aunt Nancy would come up to your granny's house and just go in the kitchen and fry an egg for herself just when she wanted to. Well, anyway, that's what your granny said. The author is giving an author's note at this point. Katy had no way of knowing her inquisitive son would grow up to be the family genealogist. She never thought that he would travel from courthouse to courthouse, asking questions and researching records and visiting cemeteries and checking engravings and spending days trying to accurately record names and births and deaths. Thanks to Kenneth Ray, the family names of Webb, Shearbaum, Brooks, Dalton, Choate, Simmons, Cavett, Boner, Kelly, Moore, Edmonds, Alsip, Lamphere, Burklow, Brown, McHugh, and other names would be researched. Kenneth Ray's questions would lead him to records from Germany, back to the many states in the United States, to Johnson County, Illinois, and to the Andersonville Prison, a Confederate military prison in the state of Georgia. Katy had heard that one day at Andersonville Prison, when prisoners were dying of starvation and thirst, a fresh stream of water suddenly gushed out of the ground unexpectedly and flowed down the hillside. Katy had heard that her relative, a 29-year-old man whose last name was Choate, died in Andersonville prison. Katy wondered if that man could have been one of the thirsty prisoners who lay on the hillside and drank until he died. She had no way of knowing that Kenneth Ray would glean from the Andersonville prison records showing the information she had been questioning. Kenneth Ray's visit to the Andersonville prison confirmed the story of the Choate man's imprisonment. When Kenneth Ray found the grave marker and his feet touched the ground under which the Choate man was buried, he felt a connection to Katy's heritage. The day was going along as planned. Allen and John had been outside, hard at work. Katy and Dellie had been hard at work inside, except for a number of diversions when everybody got tickled. The dinner dishes were all washed and barely dry when the children decided they'd like to have some apple cobbler and some milk. So that meant time out and dishes to be washed. But the messing up of the dishes and the eating didn't take long for these hungry children. And Katy, Jimmy asked, did Kenneth Ray really drink out of the chicken trough? Again, the kitchen walls vibrated. Sounds of ooh, 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 ooh came from the children. Oh, Kenneth Ray. With everybody looking at him, he stood there, grinning good-naturedly. And then the back door opened. The men came into the kitchen with 2 dishpans mounting up with fresh meat. Fresh hog meat. Katy looked at Dellie. Dellie looked at Katy. They were once more taking care of their end of the bargain in the hog killing. And school took up again in the front room, and the afternoon progressed and wound down in the late afternoon, when milk cows were calling them, and milk time rolled around again. With the Lord's help, that day, December 9th, 1935, passed. John, Dellie, and the children went home. Cows were milked, hogs were slopped, eggs were gathered, hens were shut up, water and wood were carried in, supper was eaten. Katy's box with its treasures was scooted under the bed. The 2 fires outside barely simmered. 2 Shearbomb smokehouses sheltered the evidence of the day's labor. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. And this day of December 20th, 1935, had finally come to an end for Allen. He listened to hear Katy as she moved around in the kitchen. He heard her as she poured water from the tea kettle into the washpan. He heard her footsteps as she walked quietly from the kitchen into the front room. He thought, that's a mighty good woman. He was thinking about how much he'd enjoy hearing her read the Bible to him. Lately, she'd been reading from Matthew 24. She'd already finished reading all of the chapters in Revelation. Somehow, Allen thought Matthew and Revelation went hand in hand. Allen's father, whom Allen called Mr. Brooks, answered many questions that Allen had asked him about the 7 churches and the 7 seals. He wanted to hear more about John on the Isle of Patmos. He wanted to figure out what was meant by the great beast and the Antichrist. He and Mr. Brooks had talked about the mark of the beast. Allen studied these thoughts, and how he wished he and Katy would have just a little more time to study the Bible. He said to himself, poor Katy, she's been looking a bit peaked these last few days, especially early in the mornings. Well, with compassion in his voice, he told her, Katy, hon, you come on to bed as soon as you can. You ought to try to get some rest. I've been seeing you put in some mighty hard days since we moved up here. You ought to try to get to bed. I'm going to pretty soon. I'll just clean up myself a little. The clock struck on the half hour. telling Allen that it was already 7:30 at night, reminding him that working people need their rest. He recalled the old saying, "The sleep of a working man is sweet." Somebody had told him that came right out of the Bible, but he wasn't sure of that. He thought maybe someday I can learn to read the Bible and find out for myself. The last 3 chores of the day had been already finished: bringing in wood and kindling, filling the water bucket, and banking down the Wilson heating stove. Allen had tightened down the damper in the stovepipe, making certain the flue wouldn't draw and cause the stovepipe and flue to get red hot. Even though Allen had bedded down the stove, Katy checked it once more, paying special attention to see that the stove door was tightly closed and the damper was completely shut down. Never on a winter's night did she nor Allen neglect the heating stove before going to bed. "Well, I guess the children are asleep," Katy said softly. A time of quiet was a blessing for Katy. This was the first time all day for her to be by herself with her thoughts. A rumbling sound invaded her quiet time. Off in the short distance, to the southeast, a locomotive chugged along on the tracks of the Big 4 railroad. Many times before, she'd heard the noise of the train as it pulled its loaded cars across the big trestle and up a steep grade. She knew the engineer was making his way to the small village of Tunnel Hill, Illinois, known among the folks as the Tunnel, the home of the railroad tunnel, the Tunnel Hill School, and the little red church. The sound brought back memories of times she and Allen walked across the fields before they were married, going to Religio with other young people who lived in Christmas tree country. In her mind's eye, Katy saw the countryside and the way it looked when she was a carefree girl at home. Even back then, in the 1920s, the hills were sparsely populated with people, but rich with lush, green cedar trees. Perhaps Mother Nature spoke to each cedar, encouraging each one to become the most beautiful tree, just perfect, the one to be chosen, cut down, and decorated for a family's Christmas tree. Perhaps Mother Nature beautified the landscape by planting the cedars among other trees and lining them in straight rows and grouping them together in groves and dotting the homestead with single trees, just as a reminder of God, His handiwork, and His presence in Christmas tree country. How dearly Katy loved Johnson County. She thought, "I hope we don't ever have to leave Tunnel Hill. These folks here are my folks. I was born here, and Allen too, and the children too. Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see." Mommy was a Choate, and kin to the Simmons people, and Poppy's people were the Daltons, and Allen, I guess, is what they'd call a third-generation Sherbaum in Johnson County. A lot of our people are buried in Webb and Taylor. Poppy's people are buried at Reynoldsburg, some at Mount Olive. Well, Allen's feelings were the same as Katy's. He too had strong Johnson County ties, but he realized that he'd have a hard time making a living on this land. "This place is good for one thing, growing Christmas trees," he'd say. Then, being wise and somewhat philosophical, he'd compare a person with a tree and say, "Not every tree growing out in the woods will turn out to be a Christmas tree." Folks agreed with Allen's observations. As Katy washed up for bed, the chugging of the locomotive on the Big 4 railroad stirred the longing within her to see her folks, Mommy and Poppy Brooks. The Brookses lived a short distance southeasterly of the Foxton Webb place, but a short distance can be a long distance when it keeps people apart, and tonight her folks seemed to be far away from her. In her throat she felt an aching, tight feeling. She swallowed. She listened. She wondered if Mommy and Poppy were sleeping, or if they were awake and hearing this locomotive on this December night. What a lonesome sound, she thought. She found some comfort in hoping she'd be going home often in the spring when the weather was warm. Maybe Allen'll take us over there to see Mommy and Poppy on Christmas Day. Today's already December 20th, and that'll be just next week. Why, that'd be this coming Wednesday. But Allen said something about helping John cut up some wood. Well, maybe, but warm weather will be here pretty soon, and I can walk then. I'll walk across fields with children. I'll just have to wait till warmer weather gets here. Something wrong, hon? Allen said sleepily. He yawned. Katy didn't answer his question. It was much too late for him to be missing sleep. I'll make sure the boys are covered up, she thought, and try to get myself to bed. Without leaving the room, Katy was able to look at Kenneth Ray and Benny. She wouldn't dare think of putting her boys in a bed upstairs in the coldest part of the house, away from her. No, the whole family slept in the same room, safe and under her care, where she could see them and hear them during the night. Such a comfort it was for her to see Kenneth Ray and Benny sound asleep. Only the tops of their heads were showing. There they were, lying close together under the heavy homemade quilts. "You boys are really growing up fast," she whispered, but of course they didn't hear her. Her thoughts rambled. It seems like yesterday Kenneth Ray was a baby, just sitting up. I can still see Poppy coming down that hill on his way to the house there on the Gene Kuntz place, carrying that high chair that he'd made for him. I was so proud of it, and Poppy was proud too. He'd made it out of pine. It took a lot of work, and it's in there in the kitchen by the eating table, and Kenneth Ray got too big for it, and Benny used it, and now Geraldine uses it. Standing close to their bed, she looked at her two boys for a long time, amazed. Kenneth Ray, 6 years old, was outgrowing all of his good school clothes. The brand new overalls she'd bought for him to wear just last fall hardly covered his shoe tops. At first, she'd have to roll them up because they were too long, and now Katy was hoping he could wear them until the end of February, at least 2 more months. Too soon, 4-year-old Benny, well, he'd be going to Webb School, wearing Kenneth Ray's hand-me-downs. Benny was already trying his best to keep up with Kenneth Ray, and Kenneth Ray'd been trying for a long time to be big, like his daddy. Katy said to herself, "I'd like to keep them little all of their lives." But she knew she couldn't. She tried her best instead to keep up with growing legs, good overalls, good clothes, and enough clothes to be decent out in public. Yes, she'd let Kenneth Ray start out in the world away from her nearly all day long. Being so protective, Katy felt separation pangs. On school mornings, when Kenneth Ray grabbed his lunch bucket, he'd run down the hill, the lane leading away from the Foxtan Webb place, to meet his teacher, Miss Eileen, and ride in her car to the Webb School. But then, as Katy listened to him saying his ABCs and see him holding up his big lead pencil and watch him as he drew wiggly lines for the letters, she was overjoyed. And one day after school, Kenneth bolted through the kitchen door and told her he could count up to 100. And with his lunch bucket in his hand, he stood in the middle of the kitchen floor and counted all the way up to 100, and she was as excited as he was. Yes, that canceled out some of the separation pangs. Kenneth Ray's lessons didn't stop at the Webb School. At night, while Katie was in the kitchen, he'd sit at the eating table. By the light of the coal oil lamp, he'd say and write his numbers, his letters, and spelling words. When Katie was finished with putting the dishes in the Hoosier cabinet, she'd say his 5 spelling words in big letters, and staying between the lines on his tablet, he'd print those words in his tablet for Mommy. Then it was time for Kenneth Ray to read. By the lamp of the coal oil light in the front room, she, Alan, Geraldine, and Benny sit around the heating stove and listen to Kenneth Ray read from his first grade Dick and Jane reading book. See Dick. See Jane. See Dick run. See Dick and Jane run. As days passed in school, Kenneth read, Look, Spot, look, Jane, look, Dick, look, Mother, look, Father. Then he could read several words without stopping. Look, Mother, see Spot run. Look, Mother, see Spot and Jane run. Look, Father, see Dick and Jane run. Look, Puff, see Father and Mother. Look, Puff, see Dick and Jane run. See Mother, see Father, see Mother and Father run. September passed, October passed, November passed, and December rolled around. Kenneth Ray took a liking for the month of December. It was time for Christmas decorations at school. Miss Eileen knew that a child away from home can be restless, especially a boy in first grade, and she came up with a December plan that would let Kenneth Ray and the whole school use some pent-up energy. At the November school board meeting, Miss Eileen asked for permission to allow her pupils to put up a Christmas tree in the schoolhouse. Albert William Sherbaum, being a school board member and Kenneth Ray's grandpa, volunteered to cut down and deliver a tree. Miss Eileen set the day of December the 11th, 2 weeks before Christmas, as the day for Mr. Sherbaum to bring the tree and nail its sawed-off trunk to boards and stand it up and make sure it wouldn't fall over. Miss Eileen wanted to allow several days for the children in the Webb School to enjoy their tree. Then she'd have to close the school until January 6, 1936. That time was for a Christmas vacation, a time with families. Her car wouldn't go by the Foxtan Webb house and stop and pick up Kenneth Ray. Fires wouldn't be built in the big stove. Chalkboards wouldn't be erased and washed. Floors wouldn't be swept. On the day following the school board meeting, Miss Eileen told her pupils about things that could be made into decorations. All of the grades, 1st through 8th, began collecting pine cones, red berries, brightly colored paper, and ears of popcorn. For 2 days, every pupil in the school searched and filled and carried or dragged tow sacks and bushel baskets to school. One boy, a short boy, found 89 pine cones. Other children brought red berries and colored paper. Kenneth Ray brought several ears of popcorn, enough for the whole school, in his heavy tow sack. Miss Eileen looked at the assorted collection and said, "Children, today is the day for us to begin putting our hands to the task." First, the boys sat cross-legged on the floor, with the tow sack in front of them. They shelled all of the popcorn Kenneth Ray had used to bring, and he had toted it to school. They were ready to shell that popcorn. Big hands and little hands worked hard to remove the small kernels. Blistered thumbs, red fingers, and the rubbing of corn cobs against the ears of popcorn forced the kernels from the cobs. As the boys worked, Miss Eileen told her older students that they'd be taking the shelled corn home. She asked them to help with popping the popcorn, but to leave it unsalted. Then they could bring the popcorn back to school. She thought, they'll probably eat most of it when it's popped, so I'll need to shell some more at home and pop it too, just in case. Now, while the boys were busy with the shelling, she included each girl in the Christmas tree decoration. She handed out scissors and told them to cut long strips for loops. The loops later would be pasted together with white school paste, and hopefully they'd stay together and form garlands. All of the red berries were laid aside for decorations on pictures. Some of the youngest pupils drew pictures of snowmen. Others drew pictures of horses and mules and called them snow horses and snow mules. They decorated their artwork with the red berries, pasting them on for the eyes, the noses, the mouths, and buttons. Miss Eileen drew pictures of Christmas trees, snow-covered landscapes, houses, barns, and church buildings. She'd have them stand in front of the lowest windows in the schoolhouse, and they'd place her artwork on the panes. They learned they could see Miss Eileen's perfect drawings, and they'd place white paper over her dark outlines and draw. This, she said, is what we call tracing. Every pupil traced using a lead pencil, with one pupil helping another pupil hold the two papers in place on the glass panes. Soon Miss Eileen's outlines became drawings of houses, barns, schools, churches, and Christmas trees. Each pupil then very carefully colored his or her drawing. She also showed them how to draw freehand Christmas trees with a star on the top. She could trace what she'd drawn or make their own drawings. When the school day came to a close, there were colored stars, snowmen, snow horses, snow mules, big trees, little trees, Christmas trees, and whatever was in their imagination all over Miss Eileen's table. What beautiful artwork the Webb School pupils produced. "You've worked hard today," Miss Eileen said. "When we get some popcorn all popped up, we'll use recesses and string the kernels. Let's all get busy and sweep the floor and pick up these corn cobs for the kindling box. Who wants to sweep the floor for us?" After the room was cleaned up, she said, "Boys, go to the coat room and get your things ready to go home. Come back and sit down in your seats." Gladly the boys put on their coats, gathered up their lunch buckets, and talked in soft tones while getting ready to go home. She dismissed all of them to go to the restrooms. A first-grade girl was sound asleep with her head on her desk when Miss Eileen told the girls to go to their coat room. She followed the girls and returned with a small coat, scarf, and gloves. Gently she woke the sleepy pupil and led her to the recitation bench. There Miss Eileen sat on the bench with her and helped her get ready to go home. She then went with her to the water bucket for a drink. She put her in the care of an older sister and said, "Walk close to her, please, as you're going home. Here's her list of spelling words." Miss Eileen thought, "She's a mighty little one to be in the first grade and away from her mother all day." The time had come for school to be dismissed. Take your list of spelling words home with you. Say them over and over and over Close your eyes and spell them. Write them down in your tablets. The first graders will say their words for me tomorrow." She passed out the spelling word sheets. Quickly Kenneth looked at his list. Box, man, tree, the, you. "I think I can say all of these words," he thought, "and Mommy'll be proud of me." He found a dry place in his lunch box for the list and said to himself, "I'm ready to go now. Call my row. Call my row first, Miss Eileen. Call my row first." "Row 1," she said, and motioned for row 1 to stand. Preoccupied, Kenneth Ray sat in his seat. The others in his row stood and walked to the front of the schoolroom. He was busy talking to himself in his mind, and no, he didn't hear her call row 1. He just sat there in his seat. He was the only one sitting in row 1. Embarrassed, he felt his face turn red. He felt his ears burning under his heavy cap. Finally he did get out of his seat and joined the others at the door. "Alan and Katie have a mighty fine boy there," Miss Eileen thought. She smiled at him as he took his place in line. "Tomorrow afternoon we'll string the popcorn during recess time, and you are dismissed." The one-room school was soon emptied as eager students moved through the front door and down the steps. Clusters formed with brothers, sisters, cousins, and neighbors' children walking together and going home. Voices carried. Laughter rang out. Another day was over for the Webb school. Miss Eileen watched as they moved away from the school ground. She closed the door. Riding home with Miss Eileen was a treat for Kenneth Ray. As they rounded the curve, he opened his lunch box and pulled out the small paper. He wasn't the least bit shy in saying, "Miss Eileen, I can say all of my spelling words. Do you want to hear me?" Not wanting to disappoint Miss Eileen, he said each word correctly. The Foxden Webb house came into view. Quickly, the little paper was placed inside his bucket. Miss Eileen's passenger was smiling from ear to ear. Miss Eileen was smiling too. Kenneth Ray was running up the lane and yelling, "Bye, Miss Eileen. Thank you, Miss Eileen." And he was thinking about tomorrow. Miss Eileen was also thinking about tomorrow. "Tonight I'm going to pop a dishpan full, maybe 2 of them, just in case we don't have any popcorn ready." The days prior to Christmas flashed by, with all of the spelling lessons, Dick and Jane stories, printing, penmanship, numbers, adding, taking away, times tables, dividing, fractions, geography lessons, and Christmas decorations. School days just weren't long enough. The cutting and the pasting and the watching while Miss Eileen threaded and pushed that long needle through the popcorn kernels and slipped those kernels down on that long string, that took a long time too. That was tedious work, because some of those kernels broke into pieces, and the best part of that was being able to eat those pieces without getting into trouble. During the stringing of the popcorn afternoon recess, some of the pupils munched on broken kernels. Those kernels were salty from being popped in bacon grease. Others tasted the white paste as they glued the strips for the loops. They got into trouble for eating the paste, even though they didn't understand why. Miss Eileen asked them if they were hungry, and of course she knew they were. It was then when Miss Eileen called one of the tallest girls to the front of the room and whispered something to her. That tall girl sat down in Miss Eileen's seat, right behind Miss Eileen's desk. That girl looked at the room full of pupils sternly, more sternly than Miss Eileen had ever looked. Without a word, Miss Eileen walked to the front door and left the schoolroom. The pupils remained absolutely speechless while the real teacher was out of the room. They were sitting quietly when she returned with 2 large dishpans covered with white cloths. Miss Eileen was pleased and rewarded them with the ample supply of popcorn which subdued their hunger pains. The grease smudges, the salt mixed with the red berries, the snowmen, the snow horses, Christmas trees, stars, and garland strips didn't decrease the real value of the artwork, not even one whip stitch. With the last of the final touches being made, their decorations were as beautiful as any that were sold through the mail order catalog from way up in Chicago, Illinois. Finally, the 11th of December became a reality. The designated day for the Christmas tree had finally arrived. After their lunch buckets were emptied and back in their places, back in the coat rooms, and after all of the pupils were seated, there was a knock on the door. Rap, rap, rap. Miss Eileen quickly walked to the front door. It's Grandpa, Kenneth Ray thought. How excited he was when he saw his very own Grandpa Schierbaum, pull a big Christmas tree through the doorway of the schoolhouse. Kenneth Ray, sitting in row 1, was grinning and thinking, "That's my Grandpa." Grandpa was smiling too, and he was thinking, "Over there's Kenneth Ray." Yes, he was pleased to see Kenneth Ray, but he liked seeing all of the children. Stepping forward, Miss Eileen extended her hand to shake hands with him, their much-needed, anticipated visitor. "Mr. Schierbaum, as you can see, we've been expecting you. All of our lessons are finished for today." She turned to her pupils and said, "Mr. Schierbaum's cut down this big Christmas tree and hauled it here for all of us. Can you say, 'Thank you, Mr. Schierbaum'?" Across the room, pupils said, "Thank you, Mr. Schierbaum. Schierbaum, Mr. Schierbaum, Mr. Sheben. That's a hard name to say." "You are welcome," he said, amused. "Well, then I'll just put this tree back here in the corner, away from the heating stove, Miss Eileen. You children, you bring your decorations over here close to this tree. I'll help you put up some of your pretty things, up close to the top. Miss Eileen, I have a ladder in the wagon. First we'll put up the garland. Now where is the garland made with the loops? And did I hear you've strung up some popcorn for this tree?" So Grandpa, while standing on a tall ladder, hung his garland and strings of popcorn from the tall branches. Luckily, the white paste kept the strips of colored paper stuck together. Even though the strings of popcorn had a few missing kernels, and some of the popcorn broke and fell to the floor, no one minded. Grandpa placed the big silver-colored star on the top of the tree. Miss Eileen clapped, and the pupils followed her lead. Without being fussy about what went where, Grandpa let the shortest boys and girls decorate all of the bottom branches. The tallest ones were assigned the task of decorating the middle to as far as they could reach. Using caution, Grandpa allowed some of the taller, older boys to climb the ladder for the boughs that were out of reach for them. Miss Eileen, standing to the side, simply enjoyed the expression on her pupils' faces, and all during the months she'd taught them, she'd seen them go through many changes. She'd seen sadness and happiness on their faces. She'd been with them when they were sick, in school, and in their homes too. On this day of December the 11th, she saw happy, healthy, excited children and she could tell Mr. Shearbaum was in hog heaven with them. Miss Eileen, the only spectator, witnessed a joyous occasion. Perhaps the world outside of Christmas tree country would have trivialized the importance of the event. Miss Eileen, however, understood what this special time at Christmas, could mean for her pupils. She hoped this association between a good man and her pupils, a few on the verge of young adulthood, would teach lessons for the following generations. As the group squatted, stretched, and stooped, trying to decorate the tree, Grandpa made sure every single child had a chance to do something. Now, children, this is your Christmas tree, and everybody gets a chance to help make it pretty. Seeing his own grandson acting a little out of turn, he said, "Kenneth Ray, don't be so rambunctious. You've already put on a lot of pretty things, son. Now, you let this little boy here, this boy with all of his pine cones, get up close to the tree so he can put them in a spot he can reach." Willingly, Kenneth Ray stepped back. He looked up into his grandpa's eyes and saw Grandpa smiling at him. Their eyes communicated feelings. A valuable lesson was being taught. The lesson was being learned. Love and kindness did the teaching. Kenneth Ray knew Grandpa loved him, and he knew he should let that other short boy have a chance too. That's a good boy, Kenneth Ray, and son, you won't always get to be first. There are several of us here, and we've got to share. After all of the decorations were used up, Miss Eileen began putting the empty toast sacks in one place and stacking bushel baskets in another. Needles from the tree and bits of paper and broken kernels of corn were swept into a pile. Corn cobs went into the kindling box. The broom and an oily cloth were fetched by two girls, who began sweeping. A large dustpan collected the dust, which was added to the hot fire in the big stove. Soon the wood floor was as clean as a whistle. "It's time for a short recess," Miss Eileen said, which meant, "Everybody to our seats and be quiet. We'll come right back inside. First, we'll get our coats on. When we're back inside, we'll put our coats in the coat room. We'll wash our hands. We'll line up and get a drink. Boys in front of the bucket on the right, girls in front of the bucket on the left. We'll sit down in our seats. Boys, get your coats and line up on the right side. Girls, get your coats and line up on the left side." And when her pupils were in place, with coats on, she dismissed them. Grandpa said, "I'll go outside and watch over them, Miss Eileen." And there at the door of the Webb School he stood. Kenneth Ray joined him, along with the short boy who'd brought all those pine cones. Soon Grandpa called out loudly, "It's time for all of us to go inside now. Miss Eileen wants us to hurry." He gave only one pull on the school bell. At the far end of the playground, boys and girls were lined up, ready for a race. Someone yelled, "1, 2, 3, go!" Children began running from the outhouses, from behind the schoolhouse, and from each other toward the schoolhouse door. Coats, caps, and gloves went into the coat rooms. Some pupils remembered to wash their hands in the small pan. A few remembered to dry their hands on the heavy cloth towel. All of them remembered to get a drink. Thirsty pupils lined up for a drink of water. Boys' bucket and dipper on the right, and girls' bucket and dipper on the left. After all of the drinking and wiping of mouths on the backs of hands and shirt sleeves, the two water buckets were almost empty. The two long-handled tin dippers didn't even float. Kenneth Ray stopped to inspect the two galvanized buckets. and decided the boys won the drinking contest. The boys' water bucket was emptier than the girls' water bucket. His grin was from one ear to the other as he took his seat in row 1. Because the school day's activities had been taxing and the children had just come in from the cold, Miss Eileen seated them on the clean floor close to the kitchen, to the heating stove. She stood in front of them. Beginning with number 1, she pointed to each one of them and counted up to the total number in her school, 32. A hand shot up in the air. Miss Eileen, a first-grade girl, said, "I think there's still a girl in the outhouse. We should have 32 instead of 31. Thank you. Yes, we do need to look out for one another," Miss Eileen said, smiling at the first grader. Quickly, Miss Eileen counted again, up to 32. Yes, there is one girl missing, but she stayed at home today. Her mommy said she has chicken pox. So, we have everybody here except for her. Once more, the first-grade girl raised her hand. She added more to Miss Eileen's explanation for the girl's absence. "Oh, yes, I forgot she didn't come today, and I just now remembered to tell you why she didn't come today. Her mommy told my granny, and my granny told my mommy, that girl's got chicken pox and a bad case of head lice." Miss Eileen thought, "I see. Now, how many notes? Let me see. There are 4 in this family and 6 in that family, and that family has 2 and 1 in that one, and, well, I believe we'll need 8 notes to go home with them. I'll have my 8th-grade girls write on slips of paper, 'We may have head lice in school.'" She went to her desk, found small sheets of paper, wrote the 7 words, and called for 3 8th-grade girls to come to her desk with their lead pencils. She gave them instructions. Heads nodded. The writing of notes began. Miss Eileen took her place once more, standing in front of her pupils. In her hands she held a book, the Bible, and on the floor sat her school of learners. Grandpa stood behind the children. This time he was the spectator, enjoying them and listening to Miss Eileen. She began by explaining the meaning of the star, telling them about 3 wise men who saw the star and followed its beam of light until they found the baby boy, Jesus. Slowly and interestingly, she read from the Bible and explained its meaning, pausing occasionally when a hand shot up in the air. Kenneth Ray listened intently. Sitting there on the schoolroom floor, he scooted close to the short boy who brought the pine cones. The 2 of them quietly followed Miss Eileen from page to page. Her account of the story of the star and its bright light didn't seem strange to Kenneth Ray. He raised his hand and said, "When Daddy goes down to the barn in the dark, he always carries the lantern for light. One night our old bossy cow found a calf in the dark, and Daddy went down there to hold the lantern for old Bossy. Sometimes at night Mommy will light a lamp in the kitchen and light a lamp in the front room at the same time." Furthermore, Miss Eileen's explanation of Jesus being a baby made perfect sense to Kenneth Ray. Being a big talker, he added a conclusion to Miss Eileen's story by again raising his hand politely and saying, "Everybody starts out like a little baby. Geraldine used to be a baby, and she'd mostly just cry and sleep. Mommy had to feed her and change her daddies a lot. Daddy and Mommy had to rock her a lot too, and let her sleep with them. And then Benny, he had to sleep in bed with me, 'cause Geraldine was a baby. Baby Jesus was like Geraldine when she was a baby, I guess, 'cept he was a baby boy like Benny when he was a baby, and like me when I was a baby. Miss Eileen had finished reading from the 2nd chapter of Matthew. She told them to go back to their seats for the program. That was to be a time of singing and poem recitations. She called for row 1 to come forward and sit down on the recitation bench. After Kenneth Ray sat down, he looked toward the back of the schoolroom, searching for his grandpa. Grandpa, standing there, was smiling, and because Miss Eileen didn't allow her pupils on the recitation bench to make funny faces or laugh or giggle, Kenneth Ray didn't return Grandpa's smile. Patiently, he sat on the bench as Miss Eileen called on one and then another, and then finally she called on him to recite the Christmas poem he had memorized. Nervously, he stood up, proud and tall, and recited his piece, word for word, right there in front of his teacher, his grandpa, and all of the Webb School. In his mind, he could hear Mommy's voice slowly pronouncing the words over and over: Mary, Mother of Jesus, Joseph, stable, manger, Bethlehem of Judea, King Herod. Now on that first day, when Miss Eileen handed him his piece on that poem paper, he was afraid. Miss Eileen had printed long words. The words had a lot of letters in them, not like Dick, Jane, Spot, Puff. He was afraid he couldn't ever learn to say the big words Miss Eileen printed on his poem paper. But then he found out Mommy could say them. And here he was on the program day. As he stood there in that schoolroom and was trying to breathe in and out, he was scared no more. Everyone in the room was seated, even Grandpa, and Miss Eileen was sitting down too, but he was standing, and he felt sure of himself. Without the slightest bit of nervousness, Kenneth Ray looked that crowd in the eye. Clearly, he said each big word with some help. As he spoke, he visualized Mommy's face, and she said the poem with him. That crowd just didn't hear Mommy saying the poem. As he stood there, reciting, he wanted to burst into laughter. He felt a tickle in his belly. He was so happy. He'd memorized his piece for Miss Eileen and could say those hard words right, and say them fast, too. How he wished Mommy and Daddy and Benny and Geraldine and Granny Shearbaum and Grandma and Grandpa Brooks and all of his family could be there to see him and listen to him saying his Christmas piece. Before school was dismissed, the pupils sang Christmas songs. Grandpa was the only outsider hearing their music, but they sang as if they were singing for the world's biggest audience. When they sang Jingle Bells, Kenneth Ray's voice could be heard above all of the others. He was enthusiastically making a joyful noise before the Lord and anyone else who would be listening. Jingle Bells would forever and ever and ever be Kenneth Ray's favorite song in the whole world. While Miss Eileen spoke to her pupils to dismiss them, Grandpa looked at the fire in the stove and closed the damper. I'll carry in some wood and kindling for tomorrow, Miss Eileen. I can get Kenneth Ray and some of the boys to help me. We'll all carry in an armful, and you'll have it ready for in the morning. This stove will be fine. Don't worry about it.
and I'll draw up the 2 buckets of water for tomorrow. I don't think that the water will freeze here tonight." "I wouldn't think so, Mr. Sherburne." "Well, now, girls, let's get things in order in this schoolroom. Let's cover up the water buckets with these clean cloths. And will you help me hand out these 8 notes? Didn't we have a wonderful time today? Your tree is beautiful. I enjoyed your singing and your poems, and that was good of Mr. Sherburne to cut down that big tree and bring it to us." After the door to the Webb School was closed and locked, Grandpa told Kenneth Ray to climb up into the wagon. Others who lived along the way were told to climb up too, and for the second time Grandpa was entertained by the joyful children, this time with their singing being punctuated with spontaneous interjections. Throughout Christmas Tree Country rang the first verses of Silent Night. "Joy to the World," "O Little Town of Bethlehem," and "Jingle Bells." Sitting down with Kenneth Ray on the floor of the wagon were several children, bouncing along without a care in the world. One child in particular who sat close to him was the little short boy who'd brought all of the pine cones. The 2 boys exchanged glances. A cold, shiny marble was placed into Kenneth Ray's gloved hand without a word being spoken, and a large, black, 2-eyed button with a string threaded through its eyes and tied to form a circle found its way into the short boy's gloved hand without a word being spoken. Days passed. Christmas was getting closer. Even though Miss Eileen's songs weren't all about Santa Claus, Kenneth Ray learned from a girl in row 1 that a man named Santa Claus lived somewhere at the top of the map in a North Pole, something like a fence post, and he made toys and stuff to give away to good boys and girls all over the world and everywhere. The girls said Santa Claus traveled around and that he'd go to all of the houses and leave presents at Christmas. To confirm the girl's story, Kenneth Ray asked Miss Eileen about Santa Claus. She told him to ask his mommy and daddy.
"Mommy, have you ever heard about Santa Claus?" "Well, Mommy, have you ever seen Santa Claus?" "Well, no, Kenneth Ray, I've not ever seen Santa Claus." "Do you think Santa Claus knows where I live?" "Well, she stammered. Katie had to stop and think. "Son, they say he can't always find every house." Not fully satisfied, he asked Daddy the same questions and found out that even Daddy didn't know much about Santa Claus. He'd asked Miss Eileen, Mommy, and Daddy, and he was beginning to think that that girl didn't know much about Santa Claus. He decided to talk to Mommy one more time. He began by asking, "Mommy, do you believe there's a Santa Claus? Do you think he knows all about everything? Do you think he brings Christmas presents for every boy and girl all over the world?" "Well, now, son, I just..." But the answer he wanted to hear wouldn't come out of her mouth. Katie didn't want to tell her boy a lie. No, she believed in telling the truth. The Santa Claus story wasn't altogether truthful, and she just couldn't tell Kenneth Ray that old Santa was real. He spoke up before she had to say any more. "Mommy, you believe Jesus knows all about everything, don't you, Mommy?" "Oh, yes, I believe Jesus knows everything about everything." "And Jesus knows where I live now? And he knows we've moved up here to this here house on the Fox Dan Webb place?" "Yes, hon, he knows." "Well, Mommy, I'm going to ask Jesus to let us have a pretty Christmas tree. I hope he'll let me and Benny go with Daddy and find one. And, Mommy, I'm going to ask Jesus to bring me a brand new Barlow pocket knife for Christmas. Katy breathed a sigh of relief. She felt peaceful. She was cautious in giving the Santa Claus answers that he wanted to hear, and she justified her beliefs this way. Kenneth Ray will be reaching the age of accountability in a few short years. If I convince him now that there really is a Santa Claus, and have to tell him later that there is no Santa Claus, he may wonder about Jesus being real or made up, like Santa Claus. Katy thought she'd heard the most of his peppering questions, but he was satisfied for only a short while. She wasn't surprised when he asked, "Mommy, how many more days till Christmas?" Now for Katy, that was an easy question to answer. Every day when he'd come home from school, he was talking about Christmas. He wanted to crack walnuts, thinking that would hurry up Christmas. "Mommy, I want some divinity candy," he'd say. "Will you make the divinity candy for Christmas? Are you going to put walnuts in it? Mommy, when are you going to make divinity?" Always Katy made a big batch of delicious snow-white divinity at Christmas time for Alan and the children. With the weeks before Christmas nearing, she was hoping she'd have a few more walnuts to flavor the candy. Usually a man named Lonzo Edmond gathered up walnuts, and sometimes if the notion struck him right, he'd stop and leave a good-sized sack of walnuts on the back porch. Katy had a hammer and 2 bricks ready, just in case Lonzo would show up. Either she or Alan, while sitting on the floor by the heating stove, would place a walnut on the brick and hit it just right with the hammer and break the hard shell. Kenneth Ray and Benny'd try to break the walnut shells, and sometimes the hard blows with that hammer would bruise thumbs for them, and a few tears would fall on the broken shells. But they had good luck with picking the walnuts. They'd use a small nail or a hairpin and gouge down into the shell and get out some of the walnut pieces. They'd eat a whole lot of them, and then they'd save some of the rest for the divinity. Sometimes when Lonzo'd bring the walnuts, he'd stay with them for a day or so. On those nights, after supper, they'd all crack and pick, and Katy'd pop popcorn, enough to fill a big dishpan. They listened as he'd talk and tell funny, strange stories. Oh, yes, and the fun and the times and the laughing began when Lonzo'd finish off a story or a conversation by saying, "Ah, yes." From past experience, Katy had no assurance of Lonzo's predictability, but she did have hope. And to lessen the number of Kenneth Ray's endless questions, she said, "We'll make the divinity candy as soon as we can, as soon as Lonzo comes by, and that could be any day now." But truthfully, Katy wasn't placing a big store in the reliability of his coming by, and she was beginning to think that the walnuts would be pretty scarce in the Christmas candy. Nevertheless, a promise made meant a promise kept in Katy's mind, and divinity candy, walnuts or no walnuts, was in her plans. December 20th, 1935. That was a big day at the Webb School. Finally, Kenneth Ray received complete satisfaction for all of his questions. He knew Christmas was getting closer when Miss Eileen announced, "After school today, you'll be dismissed until Christmas is over. You won't come back to school until next year, on January 6, 1936. Hanging on the wall behind her desk was a December 1935 calendar. Miss Eileen pointed to the day, 2020, printed in bold, bright red colors on the calendar. She said,
and for the next few days you'll be able to stay at home with your families. I know you'll be good children, and before you leave to go home, I want to give you Christmas treats. In that basket by my desk, there'll be 1 apple and 1 orange for each one of you. I have a sack of hard candy and a sack of horehound candy for you to take home to share with your families. Now, here's a stick of licorice for each of you to eat on your way home. And you can put your treats in the dinner buckets, I guess, or you can put them in your coat pockets. You older ones, will you help your brothers and sisters? I wish you a Merry Christmas with your families. Christmas Day is only 5 days away. With that explanation, Miss Eileen picked up a totally new Drover State Bank of Vienna, Illinois, 1936 calendar. She hung it on the nail and covered the 1935 calendar. Now, you can see the month will begin with January in the new year, 1936. We're ending one year and going into a brand new year, and Christmas is only 5 days away. 5 days, only 5 days. Miss Eileen had said the magic words. Kenneth Ray was fidgety with excitement. He knew what FIVE meant because he was already SIX, 6, and he could count to 5 on one hand. He could count up to 100 if he wanted to. Since the day before Christmas was so close, he had another reason for being excited. With his own ears, he'd heard Daddy tell Mommy, "I think the boys are big enough to go with me to chop down a tree for Christmas. I want to hitch up old Beck and Kate to the wagon and take some of the fresh hog meat down to Mommy and Poppy. I'll let the boys pick out a tree up there along the road, and we can cut it down and haul it home on our way back." And he'd heard Mommy say, "I don't know, Alan. Maybe you ought to go ahead and take the fresh meat down to Lulie and Albert and not take the boys. I want you to take the meat down to them, but I believe they'd be better off here at home." She stopped, hoping he'd agree with her. She went on to say, "Alan, we could just go out there on the hill close to the house and find a Christmas tree. There's a pretty one down there on the road, a ways from the cemetery, right there on the right side of the road, close to the curve." And then Kenneth Ray had heard Daddy say, "Oh, now, Katie, I'll tell you, it wouldn't hurt anything for them to go with me. They'd stay warm if you'd bundle them up, and we could throw in a couple of old quilts. They'd be all right, hon. If I leave here right after the milking's done, we can get down there and eat a bite of dinner with the folks, and then start right back home. I'd get them back home before too late, and if you could just get up the cows, I'll do up the milking. I can milk after dark if I have to." Well, with some hesitation, she said, "You go ahead, and I just hope they won't get sick and that you won't have any trouble." Now, saying that took a lot of doings for Katie. You see, Katie'd never let her boys go too far from home without her. At school, Kenneth Ray had to stay away from home for a whole day at a time. But even then, she was often wondering about the little fella. Sharp ears overheard Katie giving permission for them to go. Kenneth Ray was jumping up and down. "Hey, Benny," he called out, "Mommy's really going to let us go with Daddy, and we're going to go tomorrow in the morning." After all this was said and done, the decision was final. The boys were looking forward to a long ride in the wagon with Daddy, and Katie didn't want to disappoint them. They'll be all right with Ellen, she thought. Tomorrow they'll be riding a good piece from home, and I won't be with them, but they'll be all right. However, if Katie could have seen into the future, she would have refused to give consent for such a trip. Her 2 boys were to go out on one of the biggest, most exciting, and most dangerous adventures of their young lives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The timepiece was announcing the time on this day, December 20th, 1935. Katie's thoughts returned to the child she was holding. It was time to lay Geraldine on the bed. She barely moved as Katie placed her close to her daddy. As if by instinct, his long arm reached out to pull her into the warmed space close to him. She would sleep there until Katie was in bed. She'd then ease Geraldine next to her on her side of the bed. That way, Alan could sleep. He could get some rest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 o'clock at night. Faithfully again the timepiece struck as Katie was checking to see and make sure that Geraldine hadn't wet on herself or wet the bed. Katie thought, well, thank the Lord, she's still dry. I've almost got this child used to sitting on the pot during the daytime. Maybe she'll stay dry all through the night pretty soon. She's sound asleep, and so is Alan, and the boys are too. I'm going to wipe off my feet and go to bed now. Wait. No, Katie couldn't go to bed yet. A mouse ran from behind the kitchen stove and through the doorway and into the kitchen, giving her one more job to do before going to bed. She squatted down to retrieve the mouse trap from under the Hoosier cabinet. She baited the trap with a piece of hog jowl and placed it up under the cabinet, far away out of Geraldine's reach. Moving slowly, she managed to wash her hands, thinking of how good lying down would feel. Noticeably, the house was getting chilly since the stove was bedded down for the night. Looking around and hearing no disturbing sounds, Katie blew out the flame in the coal oil lamp, sat down on the bed, wiped her feet with a damp wash rag, and touched the body of her baby. Easily, Katie lay down, being oh so careful to keep from lying on Geraldine's small frame. All was quiet in the house, there on the hill, on the Foxdan Webb place. Katie pulled the covers up close to cover Geraldine's chest, thankful that her stove-top medicine was working. She sighed. She felt the pleasure of letting her overly tired body lie prone on the comfortable bed. She enjoyed the faint, sweet scent of the freshly laundered sheets that she'd washed with Mommy's homemade lye soap. She noticed the smell of fresh Christmas tree country air mixed with the lingering fragrance of the soap. The pleasant odor rewarded her for her work that she'd completed. Just that day she'd pinned the wet sheets to the clothesline. She'd waited for the sheets to freeze dry. Her sheets were stiff when she carried them through the back door, and she'd taken care in putting the sheets on the bed. With a clean bed to sleep in, with her boys close by her in the room, with Alan resting, and with her little one lying next to her, Katie was thankful. Alan snored. One of the boys rustled the covers. Geraldine breathed deeply. Katie whispered, "Dear Lord." Although Katie slept, she visited the past. She dreamed. She spoke to the Lord again in her dreams. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Katie slept soundly. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock.